You stood in that doorway watching her hands, not her face, because the lesson lived in the tilt of the skillet, the pinch pulled straight from memory. Nobody handed her a recipe card. Nobody needed to. Here are 30 easy suppers 60s black moms made without a recipe that have disappeared. Salmon croquettes turned a 15-cent can into something that smelled like real cooking. She drained the pink salmon, bones and all, mashing them in because those soft bones weren't going to waste, then folded in diced onion, cracker meal, a beaten egg, and black pepper until it held its shape in her palms. Cast iron hot, each patty dropped in with that flat hiss that meant the temperature was right. You didn't need a thermometer, you knew the sound. In the 1960s, a 14-ounce can of pink salmon cost less than a quarter at corner stores on Chicago's South Side and Detroit's Black Bottom, and it fed 4 people without anyone leaving hungry. The simplest question about this dish today, how do you keep them from falling apart, tells you exactly who learned it by watching and who didn't. Smothered cube steak was the weeknight miracle that made a cheap, tenderized cut taste like something a family had worked all day to deserve. She dusted each piece in season of flour, salt, black pepper, garlic powder pressed in by hand, then laid them into hot oil and didn't touch them until the crust was set, because flipping too early was how you lost the bark she'd spent years getting right. Once browned, she built the gravy in the same skillet, scorched flour bits lifted with water, onion rings laid down flat, everything simmered dark and glossy. The steaks went back in, covered low heat, 30 minutes until they cut with the side of a fork. Cube steak, mechanically tenderized, top round, was sold in black neighborhoods at a fraction of sirloin's price. The gravy did the work the price couldn't. She made this on Wednesdays, always Wednesdays, and the smell met you at the front door before you touched the knob. Nobody makes it on Wednesdays anymore. Nobody makes it at all. Crackling bread is what happened when the hog rendering was done and cracklings were left over. Those curled, salty bits of fried pork skin that came out of the log pot. She folded them straight into the cornbread batter, and what came out was something no plain cornbread could touch. Pork fat worked into every bite, the cracklings making pockets of salt and crunch. The technique traces to the era when hog killing in late fall was a community event. Neighbors working together, nothing wasted, cracklings going directly into that evening's bread. By the 1960s, most urban households had moved past home lard rendering, but cracklings were still sold in paper bags at southern markets, and grandmothers who'd come north on the Great Migration kept the recipe because they knew what plain cornbread was missing. What it was missing was this: the last people who made it right are mostly gone. The loss is not a small one. Pinto beans with salt pork over white rice was the Monday supper, the wash day meal set on the back of the stove before laundry started and left to simmer all morning. She rinsed the dried pintos the night before and soaked them in cold water until morning. The salt pork went in early, that cured, fatty slab that cost almost nothing and gave the pot everything. Low heat did the rest, breaking the beans down into a thick, creamy broth that absorbed every bit of the pork smoke by the time supper came around. Pinto beans followed black families north during the Great Migration, arriving in Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland kitchens as a comfort that needed no adjustment for the new address. The rice went underneath, plain and white, and the beans went over, and that was enough. You ate until the bowl was clean. She is gone now. Nobody starts the beans the night before anymore. But before beans were the last thing standing, liver and onions held the weeknight table, a dish that asked you to trust the cook before you trusted your own nose. Beef liver in the 1960s cost less than ground beef at every butcher counter in black neighborhoods and carried more iron than any muscle cut on the shelf. She sliced it thin, no thicker than her thumb, dusted it in flour, and laid it into a very hot skillet because overcooked liver is something a person doesn't forget in a good way. The onions went in first, low and slow until translucent and sweet, and the liver finished in that same fat. Brown gravy came from the pan drippings. The secret, and it was a secret because nobody wrote it down, was a splash of vinegar into the gravy at the end, just enough to cut the richness without anyone being able to name what they were tasting. From the 1970s on, liver fell out of favor as beef got cheaper, and the connection to budget cooking felt like something to leave behind. The vinegar trick vanished with it. Stewed tomatoes over white rice was so simple, it embarrassed people who hadn't grown up eating it, and that embarrassment is exactly how it disappeared. A can of whole, stewed tomatoes went into a saucepan with butter, a pinch of sugar, salt, black pepper, and sometimes a small onion diced fine. That was it. It simmered until the tomatoes broke apart and the liquid thickened just enough to cling to the rice underneath. The sugar was not optional. It balanced the acid in a way that anyone from these kitchens recognized instantly and anyone outside them never thought to add. This dish of the Depression years survived into the 1960s because it cost almost nothing. A can of stewed tomatoes ran about 8 cents at most stores, and a cup of dry rice fed 4 people. The flavor was not humble, it was clean and bright and satisfying in the way simple food is when it's made with intention. It lived and died in these kitchens and almost nowhere else. Turkey necks and rice taught anyone who paid attention that the cheapest part of any bird was never the part with the least flavor. She laid the necks in a wide pot, covered them with cold water, and brought them up slowly with a halved onion, celery if there was any, black pepper, and a bay leaf. The heat stayed low because rushing turkey necks was how you got tough meat and thin broth. After 2 hours, the kitchen smelled like something far more expensive than turkey necks had any right to smell like. The meat pulled away in long, silky ribbons, and the broth had gone amber and thick enough to set up almost like gelatin when it cooled, a sign the old cooks knew that you'd done it right. That broth went over the rice, the neck meat went alongside, and a bottle of hot sauce sat on the table without being asked. Turkey necks were sold for pennies a pound through the 1950s and 60s in markets that knew their customers. You had to know where to ask. Not everyone knew. She always knew. The meatloaf she made didn't taste like your meatloaf, and the difference was oatmeal. During the 1940s and 50s, when ground beef was expensive and the goal was feeding as many people as possible from 1 pound of meat, black home cooks folded in dry rolled oats, not breadcrumbs, oats, along with diced onion, a beaten egg, salt, pepper, and Worcestershire sauce. The oatmeal dissolved almost entirely into the meat during baking, binding it without adding detectable texture and stretching the loaf to feed 6 instead of 4 without anyone noticing. The outside got a ketchup and brown sugar glaze that caramelized into a crust nobody left on the pan. This was kitchen knowledge passed by watching, not by recipe card. By the 1960s, it was already fading as convenience took priority and the old economy of skilled traditions felt like something to set aside. What got set aside was the best part. Butter beans with smoked ham hock were Sunday supper in all but name, served on a weeknight only because the hock from Sunday had been sitting in the icebox, and a good hock didn't go to waste after one meal. The speckled butter beans, a southern shell bean with roots in West African agricultural traditions related to the lima but creamier and less starchy, soaked overnight, and went in the pot with the leftover hock and an onion. They simmered most of the afternoon, and what came out was a thick, smoky pot of beans where the ham had dissolved into the broth and the beans had taken on all of its character. You ate them with cornbread to sop the potlikker from the bowl, and the hock bone came out stripped bare like a small ceremony. In kitchens of families who come north with their foodways intact, this supper told you everything about who raised you. She made it in a gray enamel pot that sat in the back of a cabinet after she was gone. Her daughter tried once. It wasn't the same pot, but that wasn't why it tasted different. Fried mullet and grits was a supper the coastal South understood as gospel. Striped mullet, dense, oily, full-flavored, ran the Gulf Coast and Atlantic shore in enormous numbers through the mid-20th century and was the fish of choice for black families in coastal Georgia, the Florida Panhandle, and the Carolinas before catfish took over and mullet became a word most people couldn't place. She cut the fish into thick steaks, salted them hard, dredged them in seasoned cornmeal, and dropped them into hot lard, not oil, lard, because lard runs hotter and produces a crust that vegetable oil cannot match. The interior stayed moist while the outside hardened into something you could tap with a fingernail. The grits went down first, stone ground and buttered, and the fish went alongside with hot sauce and raw onion. The older cooks seasoned the hot fat with a piece of fat pork before the fish went in, a step that made the finished crust taste like something you couldn't reproduce another way. Most people never knew to ask why it tasted different. The ones who knew didn't volunteer. And if fried mullet told you where a family came from, neckbone soup told you what they'd survived. Pork neck bones, sold in 5-pound bags for almost nothing at black neighborhood markets from Birmingham to Baltimore, went into a pot with cold water and came out 3 hours later as something that defied their price entirely. She browned them first in the dry pot until the surfaces caramelized and stuck slightly. That was the flavor foundation, and skipping it was not something she would have considered. Then water, then whatever was at hand, potatoes, cabbage, turnips, dried beans, corn if it was summer. The simmer ran low and long until the broth went deeply colored and the meat had left the bone in soft, falling pieces. Working class black households through the 1940s and 60s relied on this through lean weeks. The bones cost almost nothing and yielded a full meal plus enough broth to start something new the next day. The pot always had something left at the bottom. Now the pot is gone and the bottom is empty. Sweet potato pone was what existed before sweet potato pie, a baked pudding made from raw grated sweet potato, not cooked mashed, which gave it an entirely different texture, dense and chewy at the edges, where the natural sugars caramelized against the hot pan, custard soft at the center. She grated the potatoes by hand on a box grater until her knuckles knew the job, then mixed in molasses or cane syrup, eggs, butter, ginger, cinnamon, and nutmeg without measuring once. The color of the batter told her when the molasses was right, and the smell told her when the spice was enough. Pone, from the Algonquian word apon, meaning something baked, had been a fixture in African American cooking since the antebellum South, where sweet potatoes were among the few crops enslaved people could tend and keep for themselves. The recipe was never written. It lived in the hands. Rabbit stew with dumplings was the supper that told you a family still remembered the land they'd come from. In the rural South, cottontail rabbit was hunted through the 1930s and 40s by families who couldn't afford butcher shop meat on a Tuesday, cleaned, jointed, and put in the pot with whatever root vegetables were in the garden. By the 1960s, many of those families had come north, and some still kept the habit, rabbits from live markets that operated in black neighborhoods through the mid-century or shipped up from a relative who still had land. She browned the pieces in bacon fat before the liquid went in because browned rabbit has a flavor that boiled rabbit never achieves. The dumplings were torn by hand from a thick flour and water dough and dropped straight into the simmering broth, rough torn pieces that puffed up soft and pulled the gravy into themselves as they cooked. Nobody ships rabbits anymore. Nobody asks for them. The live markets closed a long time ago. Bean pie was a supper disguised as dessert, or a dessert that had never seen the inside of a cookbook written by anyone outside the community. The Nation of Islam introduced the navy bean pie in Detroit in the 1930s as an alternative to sweet potato pie, grounded in an emphasis on African American food sovereignty. By the 1950s and 60s, bean pie spread through NOI mosques and Muslim-owned bakeries across Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia, sold from card tables and through the windows of community restaurants. The filling was cooked in navy beans mashed smooth with sugar, eggs, butter, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The result tasted nothing like beans and entirely like a custard keeping a secret. People outside the community tasted it and couldn't name what they were eating. People inside knew exactly what it was and why it mattered. A pie built on the same humble ingredient that had fed poor families for generations, transformed into something that asked nothing to be ashamed of. Most cities that once had these bakeries no longer do. Crowd of peas asked you to slow down long enough to taste them. This variety of cowpea, with roots in West Africa, named because the seeds crowd each other inside the pod, simmered all afternoon with a hog jowl, that fatty, smoky cut of pork cheek that flavored a pot the way a ham hock did, but with a softer smoke. The broth ran dark and silky because the peas released their starch slowly over the long cook. You knew they were done not by the clock, but by the color of the Potlikker. When it ran the color of dark tea, that was the rule. No timer, no measuring, just watching. Crowd of peas were a summer staple across the rural South through the 1950s and 60s, grown in kitchen gardens and sold fresh at roadside stands. The flavor dried wasn't the same as fresh, but the memory was. Rice and milk was Tuesday's supper when the money had run out before the week had, and it was exactly what it sounds like. White rice cooked soft in whole milk on the stovetop with a little sugar and a scraping of nutmeg, served in deep bowls while it was still warm. Children ate it without complaint because it tasted like something between porridge and pudding, sweet and filling, and when she made it, strangely comforting in a way that 3-ingredient food shouldn't be. She added a pat of butter at the end that melted into a slick on the surface, and the nutmeg was grated fresh if there was a whole one in the cabinet, which there usually was. Families across the South and in the industrial North ate rice and milk through lean stretches as far back as the 1930s. Most kids who grew up eating it can still describe the exact consistency, not quite porridge, not quite pudding, somewhere in between. Most of them haven't tasted it since the last person who made it passed. Smothered turkey wings proved the smothering technique, browning, building a roux-based gravy, braising low and slow under a lid until the collagen breaks down, worked on anything cheap enough to need the help. Turkey wings sold for a fraction of the price of a whole bird at poultry counters in black neighborhoods through the 1960s. She seasoned them with salt, pepper, garlic, and paprika, browned them deeply in cast iron, then built the gravy from the drippings, flour stirred dark, broth poured slow, onions laid flat, under the lid for an hour. What came out fell from the bone in pieces, glazed in dark, gravy that clung to everything it touched. Served over rice, this was the supper that felt expensive and wasn't. She is gone now, and the wings she made are gone with her, not the recipe, but the patience. Poke salad came with a warning, and if nobody warned you, you weren't from here. Pokeweed, that tall purple stem plant that shot up along fence lines and field edges across the South, is toxic raw. The leaves must be parboiled in 2 changes of water, the first boiling poured off entirely before they're safe to season. This was knowledge handed down specifically in language that didn't leave room for forgetting. She picked the young spring leaves before the plant got too tall. Old poke was dangerous even cooked. Then boiled them twice, drained them twice, and fried them down in bacon grease with onion and a splash of apple cider vinegar. The result tasted wild and slightly bitter, somewhere between turnip tops and mustard, a flavor that existed nowhere else. Tony Joe White recorded a song about it in 1968. He got it exactly right. Crackers and sardines were Friday night supper in weeks when the pay didn't stretch far enough for anything else, and in those households, nobody apologized for it. A flat tin of sardines in oil, Portuguese or Norwegian, packed tight as a memory, opened with the key soldered to the bottom, the smell hitting the kitchen in a wave that meant something was being made from nothing. She laid them on saltine crackers with a slice of onion and a shake of hot sauce, and that was the plate. Some nights there were sliced tomatoes alongside if they were in season. Sardines in oil cost less than a dime a can through most of the 1950s and 60s. The act of eating them without embarrassment, the way she made the plate feel like a meal worth sitting down for, the way she never let anyone treat it as less than supper, was a form of dignity that couldn't be bought or explained to someone who hadn't watched her do it. The kids who grew up eating this grew up. Some still can't open a sardine tin without feeling something they can't quite name. And from the lean tin of sardines on Friday, the kitchen swung the other way come summer when the corn came in and she made fried corn, not a side dish, the supper. She stripped the husks, cut the kernels off in deep strokes with a heavy knife, then tilted the blade to scrape the cob milk from the surface after each pass. That starchy, sweet liquid went into the skillet with everything else. It was what separated fried corn from plain corn. Bacon grease in the cast iron pan, hot and fragrant, then the corn and its milk in all at once, sputtering and hissing. It caramelized at the edges and went creamy in the middle. Salt, black pepper, a little sugar if the corn needed it. The dish traced back through the Deep South to the era when corn came straight from the kitchen garden in July and August, and no part of it was wasted. She made it every summer. Now the summers come and go without it. Hambone soup began on Sunday with what was left after dinner and finished on Wednesday as something better than it had any right to be. She kept the leftover hambone in the icebox wrapped in wax paper, and by mid-week, it went into a pot with cold water. Whatever vegetables were on hand, dried beans, potatoes, celery, carrots, the last of the cabbage, the hambone gave the broth its body, its salt, and its smoky undertone, transforming tap water into something a family could eat for 2 days. This was the waste nothing philosophy at its most complete, the Sunday roast becoming Wednesday's soup, nothing discarded, everything honored. Black households across the South and in northern cities practiced this through the 1940s and into the 60s, when the Sunday ham was a weekly ritual and the bones were treated as the beginning of something, not the end. Most people who still make soup buy the bones separately now. She never had to. Callous were New Orleans rice fritters that black women once sold from baskets on the streets of the French Quarter before most of the city was awake. The fritters, hot from the oil, dusted with powdered sugar, and gone by mid-morning. The tradition traced back to the Code Noir, the French colonial legal code that prohibited enslavers from requiring enslaved people to work on Sundays, creating a window for black vendors to cook and sell food in public, and rice fritters were among the most beloved things they made. The batter was leftover cooked rice folded into flour, egg, sugar, and baking powder, fried in hot oil until the outside puffed and browned. By the 1960s, grandmothers in New Orleans households still made callous on Sunday morning or as a quick supper snack. Savory versions, no sugar, same cast iron. The recipe was never written. Everyone who needed to know already knew. Stewed potatoes and onions with fatback was the dish that converted the plainest ingredients into something a table full of people was glad to sit down to. She cut the potatoes thick, not thin, because thin slices dissolved before the flavor developed, and laid them with sliced onions and strips of fatback that cured salt pork that flavored everything it touched. Water went in halfway, the lid went on, heat stayed medium until the liquid cooked down into a thin, starchy gravy coating every piece. Fatback gave up its salt and fat, the onions went soft and sweet, the potatoes absorbed all of it. This was Depression-era cooking that survived into the 1960s because it cost almost nothing and tasted like it cost more. Fatback was sold by the pound at black-owned grocery stores across the South and in northern city markets through the mid-century. You knew it was ready when the liquid had gone from clear to cloudy. No clock needed. Pickled pigs, feet in vinegar brine, with a jar on the counter of every black-owned neighborhood store and the shelf of every kitchen that kept the old ways. She made her own, boiled the feet until the skin turned soft and the joints went tender, then packed them tight into a wide-mouthed jar with sliced onion, peppercorns, bay leaves, hot pepper, and a brine of apple cider vinegar, water, salt, and a little sugar. 3 days in the icebox. When the jar came out, the skin had taken on the vinegar and spice, firm but yielding. The brine turned deep amber. She ate them cold, straight from the jar on Friday nights. Pig's feet have West African culinary roots. The technique of preserving tough cuts in acid brine traveled to the Americas through the enslaved and persisted through generations. Nobody makes the brine from scratch anymore. Most people don't know there was a scratch to start from. And from the jar on the counter, the kitchen moved to the pot nobody talks about. Fish head stew, built from the part of the fish market gave away for almost nothing. Whole fish heads, red snapper, mullet, porgy, went into a pot with cold water, onion, celery, tomatoes, and seasoning, simmered low until the heads fell apart and the broth had taken on everything they had. Fat, collagen, the deep, clean flavor of a fish cooked whole. The cheek meat, the most tender piece on any fish, a detail that serious cooks have always known, pulled away clean and sweet. The broth ran thick and rust-colored from the tomatoes. You ate it with white rice and didn't leave a drop. This was cooking with West African roots. In Senegalese and Nigerian traditions, the fish head is the honored part of the pot, the part that holds the most flavor given to the elders or the guest. That knowledge traveled across the Atlantic and survived in these kitchens longer than almost anyone who carried it. She knew which part to ask for. The fish market knew her by name. Chicken backs and rice were the supper that stretched $1 into something warm and filling when nothing else would reach. The back is the least wanted piece of the bird, all bone and spine and a little dark meat clinging to the ribs, and it was priced accordingly at every poultry counter through the 1950s and 60s, sold in bulk bags for cents per pound. She laid them in cold water with onion, celery, salt, and black pepper, and brought them up slow because the backs needed time for the collagen in the spine to break down and enrich the broth. After an hour and a half, the broth had gone golden and full-bodied, and the meat had left the bone in soft shreds that fell apart when you touched them. She poured the whole pot over cooked white rice and called it supper. In households where the budget ended before the week did, this was the meal that appeared most often and complained the least. Every person who grew up eating it remembers the exact smell of that broth. Most of them are the last in their family who do. Before pork rinds became a gas station snack, crackling skin was the protein on the plate on evenings when the meat budget had run out. She rendered the skin herself, scored it, salted it, and fried it low until the fat cooked out and what remained was rigid and shatteringly crisp. Nothing like the airy puff snacks sold in bags today. The flavor was deep and porky and salty in a way that commercially made rinds have never come close to. Eaten alongside dried beans and rice, or crumbled into cornbread batter, or served plain with hot sauce and sliced onion, it was a protein-rich supper that asked nothing of the grocery budget and delivered more than you expected. Home-rendered pork skin was common in rural southern households through the 1950s and began disappearing from northern city kitchens by the late 1960s as processed substitutes arrived. The real thing required patience she had and a stovetop she owned. Both are gone from most kitchens now. Dirty rice got its name from the color. All those minced chicken livers and gizzards cooked down with onion, celery, and bell pepper, turning the rice a deep, irregular brown that looked like something you should worry about and tasted like nothing you'd walk away from. She browned the livers and gizzards first in a hot pan with a little oil, chopping them fine as they cooked until they were dark and fragrant, then added the trinity of onion, celery, and green pepper, the base of both Cajun and Black Southern cooking, plus garlic, cayenne, black pepper, and a bay leaf. Cooked rice folded in last, absorbing the fat and the flavor of everything in the pan. Chicken livers and gizzards were among the cheapest offal available through the 1960s, sold separately at poultry counters for almost nothing. What she made from them tasted like a dish that required expensive cuts and a long afternoon. It required neither. It just required knowing what to do with the parts that everyone else passed over. Not everyone knew. She did. Dried navy beans and ham hock started before daylight because that was the only way to have them ready by supper. She soaked the beans overnight in cold water, that small pound bag that fed a family of 5, then drained them at dawn and put them in the pot with a smoked ham hock, a halved onion, and water to cover by 3 inches. The heat stayed low all day. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen had that particular smell, low and slow and smoky, something between soup and stew. That meant supper was going to be right. The beans went creamy as the afternoon went on, the broth thickening around them, the hock giving up its meat in long shreds. She seasoned at the end, not the beginning, because salt early toughens dried beans, a detail that separated the cooks who knew from the ones who guessed. Cornbread came alongside. The pot lasted 2 days. That patience is mostly gone from kitchens now. Potlikker with cornbread dumplings was the last supper of the week, not because anyone planned it, but because by Friday the pot of greens had been cooking since Sunday, and what remained was the liker, that dark, deeply seasoned broth, thick with vitamins leached from collard or turnip greens over days of slow simmering. She dropped the cornbread dumplings straight in, a stiff cornmeal batter, no egg, spooned into the boiling broth, and covered the pot. The dumplings swelled and cooked through in 10 minutes, absorbing the liquor until they were soaked to the center. You ate them from the bowl with the broth poured over. In African American households across the South and in the urban North, potlikker was understood to be as nourishing as the greens themselves, the old women insisted on it. They were right. The broth holds the water-soluble vitamins the greens release during cooking. The science confirmed what they already knew. She is not here to say she told us so. The pot has gone quiet. The liquor has run dry. Fried corn was summer captured in a skillet made from fresh ears cut straight off the cob when gardens overflowed. Black housewives sliced the kernels off, then scraped the cob to release the milky starch that made the dish creamy. The corn went into a hot skillet with bacon grease, sizzling while being stirred constantly. Salt, pepper, and sometimes sugar balanced the flavors, while natural starch thickened everything into a custard-like consistency. Served as a side, it often became the main event because nothing else could compete. Families gathered around bowls of fried corn, eating it with cornbread alongside fried chicken. The dish required no measurements because every cook knew by sight and smell when it was done. Fried corn connected families to their gardens and the satisfaction of eating what they grew. Chicken and cornmeal dumplings stretched one bird to feed an entire congregation when times were lean but faith remained strong. Church mothers simmered a whole chicken until meat fell from bones, creating rich golden broth fragrant with celery, onion, and bay leaf. Cornmeal dumplings were mixed by hand, combining cornmeal with flour, baking powder, and lard, then dropped by spoonfuls into bubbling broth. As they cooked, dumplings swelled and absorbed the chicken essence, becoming soft pillows floating in savory liquid. The dish was ladled into bowls at homecomings, repasts, and revival week suppers. This represented resourcefulness and community, showing how one chicken could become a feast through skilled hands and generous spirits willing to share whatever they had.
Gullah red rice with sausage carried Carolina Low Country traditions into fellowship halls, a dish with roots in West African jollof rice seasoned through generations. Long grain rice was sautéed in bacon drippings with onions, bell peppers, and garlic before crushed tomatoes transformed the mixture into something rich and red, with smoked sausage adding protein. The rice absorbed every bit of flavor as it simmered, turning tender with each grain coated in tomato-rich seasoning. Churchwomen from coastal regions brought this proudly, knowing it represented cultural heritage connecting congregations to ancestors who never forgot their origins. Rice was inexpensive and fed dozens when stretched with vegetables and meat, making it practical for church budgets. The tomatoes added vitamins while sausage provided richness to satisfy working people arriving hungry. Gullah red rice appeared at Wednesday suppers and Sunday dinners, signaling someone understood honoring traditions while feeding community.
Tomato sandwiches appeared when gardens produced more ripe tomatoes than families could eat before they spoiled. Black housewives sliced thick rounds of red tomatoes, still warm from the sun, and layered them between soft white bread spread with mayonnaise. Salt and pepper were sprinkled on top, and the sandwich was pressed so the juices soaked into the bread. It was simple enough for children to make, yet satisfying enough that adults craved it after long days. The tomatoes had to be perfectly ripe, bursting with sweetness and acidity. Store-bought tomatoes could never replicate what came fresh from backyard plots. Families ate them for lunch, dinner, and late-night snacks during the hottest months. The dish required no cooking, no recipe, and no skill beyond knowing when a tomato reached perfection.
Buttermilk cornbread from scratch emerged from church ovens in cast-iron skillets seasoned through decades, creating golden rounds with crispy bottoms and tender crumbs that soaked up Potlikker perfectly. Stone-ground cornmeal was mixed with buttermilk, eggs, flour, baking powder, and salt before being poured into smoking hot skillets greased with bacon drippings that created the signature crust. The result tasted nothing like store-bought varieties, with slight tang from buttermilk and richness from drippings. Churchwomen competed quietly over whose cornbread achieved perfect texture, not too dry and not too cake-like, but substantial enough to fill stomachs and complement every dish. Cornmeal was among the cheapest staples available, with 5-pound bags costing less than $1. The bread appeared at every gathering, from Wednesday fellowship to all-day singing, where stacks disappeared as quickly as they were baked. Children reached for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults appreciated how the bread stretched meals.
Salmon croquettes were a Friday night tradition made from canned salmon mixed with eggs, onions, and cracker crumbs to hold everything together. Housewives shaped the mixture into patties by hand, never measuring, relying on feel to know when it was ready. Fried until golden and crispy on the outside, the croquettes had a tender, flaky interior that tasted better than the humble origins suggested. Served alongside rice or grits with hot sauce, they turned a simple can of fish into a feast. Canned salmon was affordable and shelf-stable, perfect for families watching every penny. Children loved the crispy edges, often fighting over the last patty. Salmon croquettes represented thrift and ingenuity, turning pantry staples into something that felt special. Pig feet and sauerkraut brought together African American cooking traditions with influences from German immigrants throughout the South. Church mothers cleaned and split pig feet, then simmered them slowly until collagen broke down into gelatinous, silky texture. Sauerkraut was added during final hours, its tangy sharpness cutting through the richness of pork and creating unexpected balance. The finished dish was tender, slightly sour, deeply satisfying, served with cornbread to soak up flavorful liquid. It appeared at church suppers during winter months when heartier fare sustained the congregation through cold evenings. Though some modern palates might hesitate, those who grew up with pig feet and sauerkraut remember it fondly as a dish that filled bellies and connected communities across cultural lines.
Black-eyed peas with ham hock simmered in church kitchens year-round but held special significance on New Year's Day, when congregations gathered to eat them for luck and prosperity. Dried peas were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with a single ham hock that released smoky, salty flavor, while onions and garlic added depth. The result was creamy beans in thick pot liquor served as soup or over rice, with ham hock's meat pulled from bone. Churchwomen understood a little meat went far when combined with beans, providing protein without the expense of steaks beyond most budgets. Black-eyed peas cost almost nothing, with dried bags available for pennies, perfect for feeding large crowds after Sunday service. The dish carried deep cultural significance, connecting congregations to Southern agricultural traditions and New Year's customs promising good fortune. Children ate them without complaint because Potlikker's richness made beans taste special, while adults appreciated both nutrition and continuity with tradition.
Neck bones and rice was built on patience and the wisdom of using what others overlooked. Black housewives knew that pork neck bones, sold cheaply as scraps, held rich flavor when cooked, low and slow. The bones were browned in a heavy pot, then covered with water and simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the meat fell away. The broth turned thick and silky from collagen, becoming gravy that soaked into every grain of rice. Served in deep bowls, the dish provided protein and comfort without straining the budget. Children learned to pick meat carefully from around the small bones. Mothers made this when time allowed the pot to bubble all afternoon. Neck bones and rice taught families that value lived in places others ignored. Smothered oxtails with rice announced itself the moment you stepped into the fellowship hall, its rich aroma filling every corner with promise. Church mothers braised these bony cuts for hours in cast iron Dutch ovens, transforming what butchers discarded into something magnificent. The oxtails were seared until browned, then slow cooked with onions, garlic, and thick tomato-based gravy seasoned with bay leaves and thyme until meat surrendered from bone. Marrow melted into the sauce, creating unmatched richness. Served over white rice that soaked up that velvety gravy, this dish fed dozens at church anniversaries and pastoral appreciation dinners. It represented elevating humble ingredients into celebrations, proving patience and skill could transform the forgotten into the unforgettable. These were the kitchens that fed generations on almost nothing and made it mean everything. Tell us which supper was yours.